All right, hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Heavy Mental Hour with your hosts, Jonathan Vlad the Impaler Sherman, licensed marriage and family therapist, and Bad Uncle Gary Klein, licensed clinical social worker. The Heavy Mental Hour is the only show that showcases real therapists, that's us, talking in real people language about real heavy mental health, relationship, and psychology issues in a lighthearted, rocking, smart, funny, and insightful way. This week, we're going to just do an overview of what the Heavy Mental Hour is going to be about, why it came about, and we're also going to start sharing something with you about what we're calling the biological model. We're just going to jump right into things, okay? So, Gary, I want you to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us why you're bothering to take time doing this.
I'm bothering you?
Yeah, well, that too.
Well, because you and I have come up with very similar conclusions, and maybe from different paths, or maybe it's the same one. You just see the same patterns over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then in school, we had to learn so much stuff. And then the licensing exam, which was for me was brutal, 4 hours and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's like this 360-degree view of what we had to learn. And then you start seeing clients, and all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, there's just a handful of patterns,
right?
A small handful.
Yeah.
And then when you start to hear someone, they come in and I go, well, here's what's going on in my life. And you go, oh, this is pattern number 4.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're a new therapist, you don't know that.
Right.
Right. You're just terrified. It's like
terrified.
You don't, I mean, it's like you have someone, I had one of my colleagues years ago, and she was an experienced psychologist. She had a client who came into her office and proceeded to have a full-blown panic attack in her office. And the client was in the fetal position, literally in the corner, rocking back and forth. And my colleague had the thought, oh my gosh, this person needs a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh my gosh, I'm the therapist.
Right.
What do I do?
What do I do?
And so part of the reason for this podcast is to really just to share a lot of the ideas that we've come up with over the years, not just us, but the larger body of research and the evidence and whatnot that we thought would be interesting, first of all, just to other colleagues. Mm-hmm. Whether they're experienced colleagues, whether they're student colleagues or new therapists, then also realize that our clients love this stuff. I mean, that's why they come and work with us, is because there's a lot of really good information that's really practical and useful. That's one thing that's important to Gary and I, that we're not just talking about theory and things that sound good in a textbook, but we really only really care about what's pragmatic, what works in the moment.
Right here, right now.
Right here, right now. Practical stuff. And I think that's one thing that our clients appreciate about the work that we do. Mm-hmm. And certainly a lot of clients will say, gosh, I wish I had recorded this. I wish I had this down so I could listen to this later. And so whether you're a colleague or a client, this is valuable, but also just the regular layperson. So many people just are so interested about how to improve relationships or how to deal more effectively with mental health issues or just psychology in general. It's just always, universally fascinating.
And it's fascinating to us.
Right. And you're fascinating to me. And of course, I could listen to myself talk forever. That's the whole purpose of this podcast. So that's really what the Heavy Mental Hour is about. Gary came up with the name the Heavy Mental Hour because he's a freaking genius, and he's also a musician. He's a drummer, and that's what he did this and many other things prior to becoming a therapist. And so, I mean, how'd you become a therapist in the first place? Because you didn't start out as a little boy saying, I want to be a therapist, and you go right into college and then whatever.
What happened is when I was 15, my mother handed me an audio cassette. It was a self-help from, I can't remember who, anyway, some psychologist. And she said, I'll give you $5 if you listen to this.
Oh, really?
And I said, okay, that's a deal. That was a lot of money back then. And so I listened to it and I was just hooked. And I said, okay, can you get another one? And she goes, oh yeah, I'll pay. And I said, no, I don't want your money. Just give me the tape.
Oh, really?
So that really got me interested. And then I got my bachelor's in psychology. And then I went off into business and for many years. Mm-hmm. And then eventually I just said, okay, I want to go back because that really interests me. And so then went to graduate school.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. And I had no clue that I was going to go into this field. I was interested in all kinds of things. I was thinking about being a chiropractor or maybe a speech pathologist. A lot of people don't know that I'm a stutterer. And you probably didn't even know that till just now.
No, I didn't know that. And,
yeah.
And you didn't know. And so if I remember the story correctly from the newspaper, the judge said either become a marriage therapist or prison.
That's right. It was an option.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I took the harder one.
Yeah.
And So yeah, and I would look at actually into acupuncture. I was thinking about being a military chaplain, graphic designer. I was interested in all kinds of maybe a high school English teacher, university professor. A lot of things really interested me, but I wasn't really sure what. And I just was going through college and happened to take a family science class, which is like psychology 101, but it was from a family systems perspective.
Okay.
And that was really intriguing. And then I started taking more of those. And then one of my, a lot of my professors also happened to be marriage and family therapists. So I started to get their bias towards this type of therapy and kind of went from there. But I'll tell you, I've been doing this now, started counseling first in a rehab program as a counselor, not as the client. And that was back before licensure was required for substance abuse counselors. Anybody could be a substance abuse counselor. And so I came straight out of my bachelor's and started doing counseling then, and then went on to my graduate studies in marriage and family therapy after that. But so all told, I've been doing, counseling for over 20 years. And I'll tell you, I've had some really crappy jobs and some really fantastic jobs. Some really crappy colleagues and some really good colleagues, that maybe we'll have on the show sometime. But the thing is, I can honestly say I've never once been bored. It's still just as interesting and fascinating as it ever was. The more I know, the more interesting it becomes. And you learn a lot in 20 years of doing this. And of course you learn, that there's tons more that I'll never, ever get figured out. But what you were saying earlier is really interesting because fortunately some things start to cluster. Some things start to just become patterns.
Right.
And even though there's a lot of different approaches to a lot of different problems, some things are core and universal from person to person to person. And I think that's really helpful for us as therapists to know that we don't need to know everything to be able to really help people with a lot of things. But that's also really helpful for clients to know because they come in with huge problems, right? Huge concerns that had been built and developed for years and entrenched for decades. And these problems have become very complicated. And so they come to counseling, which is pretty cool that they're willing to come in and talk to a complete stranger and open up all this difficult stuff. I mean, you got to respect the heck out of that. But even with the idea, okay, I'm going to go try to get some help, just the thought of getting help is depressing, even though it's a positive thing, because as a client, you're looking at it going, I've got all these years of, and even though I'm getting help, it's probably going to take years to undo all this built up stuff. When the reality is that fortunately, because there are a few things that are very common and universal, we can use, once we have a real understanding of how to do therapy this way, you can use these simple things like simplicity, this razor of simplicity, just to cut through tons of complexity. And sometimes what's really fun about therapy, I'm sure for you, is how quickly sometimes people can change. And something that's been besetting them for years can really be turned around sometimes in just in one session, sometimes in a matter of sessions, sometimes maybe in a few months, but what they thought was going to take forever turns around relatively so fast. And it's so hard for people to reach out and go to therapy. I think because they think about therapists as a shrink or being intimidating. And watch an episode of this and you'll lose all respect for us. And you realize, hey, they're not intimidating. I'm smarter than they are. I could go talk to them. And, but when they get to meet like a real therapist and realize, okay, yeah, these guys are approachable, they're down to earth, they're entertaining, or they can explain really complex things in a way that really make a lot of sense and they're highly practical, then it becomes something that, okay, I can do this, and it's freeing and it's even fun for them. And I've never had a client where they've had been making progress. I've never had them say, I'm so glad I waited this long to finally get help. There's such a barrier for people going to get help, right? Because they're afraid that the stigma around it, or I must be crazy, or there must be something wrong with me. So the fear of going to seek help is such a barrier. And I hope that that's maybe one thing that the podcast will do is, besides being fun and informative, will also help people realize, hey, I can do this. I can do this. And there's no point in waiting when solutions are so available and so ready, and most importantly, so effective.
Getting started, that's the hardest part for most people. For me, once you just get started, you end up oftentimes in that place you were talking about, which is simplicity, because most of the clutter, it's just filler. And if you can get rid of all that stuff, and I think we've talked about this, that anytime someone comes into my office, there's only one problem. It doesn't matter why they come in. There's one problem each time, every time, and that is they're stuck. If they're not stuck, they don't come in. They get stuck, they come in. And so you have to get movement right up front. And that tells the ancient parts of the brain, oh, I'm not stuck after all. Because back here, it's fight, flight. You don't hear about freeze much, but it's really powerful. That's depression. That's inability to act. Transmigration is the blood goes from here, prefrontal lobes, back to here when we think we're under attack. So the old parts of the brain don't differentiate between a life-threatening event and a non-life-threatening event. So
right. Would you define what transmigration means?
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is, all right, so I'm driving over here today, and some guy's walking across the street, and he's taking a little too long, and maybe I honk or something. He flips me off, and I'm like, oh yeah. Okay. The old parts of my brain think that I'm under attack. So a rhino comes charging at me, my stress response system kicks on. The guy flips me off, the exact same stress response system kicks on.
Right. Exact same, even though one is really threatening, one is just annoying.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. The old parts of the brain don't know the difference. This does, but the old parts of the brain work at about 70 milliseconds.
Yeah.
The prefrontal lobes work at about 500 milliseconds. 70 is a lot faster. So the back part of the brain always kicks in first. And then as it starts to increase, then the prefrontal lobes kick in and go, whoa, hang on just a second. Let's tone this down. So it's always like that.
So that's interesting with the speed thing. You're talking about there's actual speed difference that's going on here. And so, I mean, really, so if people think about it, that's a physics issue. So it's like this part of the brain is like a race car.
Right.
And this part of the brain that's trying to come up with rational thought and, hey, cool down, it's not that big of a deal, is more like a little horse and buggy trying to catch up with this race car.
Right.
So it's a physics issue. We're not going to be able to catch up.
That's right.
Right away. And this is just going to take over. And I'm just going to pause here for a minute. So this is a great place to jump in, and just want to clarify. Gary's going to be explaining kind of what we call just the biological model, and really understanding some of the just core basic biology of how your neurobiology works. So why we evolved that way, that we're really driven by our primal drives and urges more than we really realize. Nothing wrong with that, but if we don't understand that, this whole primal stuff is going to keep hijacking every single time, and we're not aware of it. So what Gary's going to be doing right now is kind of popping open the hood and showing you the mechanics of how this all works. Because if you understand how the mechanics work, you can start working it instead of it constantly working you. Okay, so anyway, go ahead, man.
Are we going to be taking calls, and also are we set up to receive international calls from listeners?
Not yet, but we are set up to receive local, national, and international cash. All right, so go to heavymentalhour.com and give us money.
Yeah, donate often.
And
generous. And see if you can outdo yourself.
Right. Maybe just make it a personal competition with yourself. Think about how much you donated last time and how much more.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? I mean, you're good enough. You can achieve great things.
Okay, so all right, we're standing outside talking to a group of people, and you catch something out of the corner of your eye, and you do that, all right, and then you go, oh, wait a minute, what was that? Oh, that was just a shadow from a bird. Okay, so that's an example of the old part kicking in.
Yeah,
it's designed to do that to keep us alive.
Yeah,
it says duck, boom, you just missed the arrow or the rock or whatever it was.
Right.
So the transmigration, when the old parts that were under attack, the blood literally goes from the prefrontal lobes back to the limbic system. And that's why anxiety, when we have anxiety, it's hard to learn new things. It's hard to remember things. Sometimes we lose our coordination because the limbic system is gearing up for fight, flight, or freeze. All right, we'll send the blood back to the prefrontal lobes later, if there is a later, if you did survive, and then you can work on math or listen to music or whatever. But right now, you're under attack.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
And then talk about the thin veneer that we were.
So we have this powerful driver that, I mean, once we get triggered, the fear response, the fight, flight, or freeze, that really takes over. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but the problem that we have is that we think we're smarter than we are. We have this, as Gary's talking about, we have this basic primal part of the brain, this reptilian or mammalian brain. Then the mid-central part, we have the limbic system, which is the emotional command center. Then up here we have our rational thought, our prefrontal lobes or neocortex. And this is kind of like, I kind of think about it like as a thin veneer. We think we're really smart, but really we're driven way more by our primal urges than anything else. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with us being a lot more primal than we are intellectual. The problem is that we think we're more intellectual than we are primal. And so what happens is we end up having this huge blind spot that we're not even aware of. We've never been taught it. We spend K through 12 and college and on-the-job training and everything else, which is great stuff, training this part of the brain. And that's great. I love that. I love education. But we don't get a lot of time training this part of the brain, the emotional reactive, the emotional driving part of the brain. And with that, then it's just going to keep driving us. And so much what we do is we're not just helping people solve their issues or help them think through problems differently. We spend a lot of time, both of us, educating people on these neural mechanics. Because I love it, because if people know what's happening, then they can just use it. They can respond to it. They go, oh, this is what's happening. Okay, this really is just somebody flipping me off. There really is no real threat. Okay, I can prepare for, not only can I process through that better in the moment, I can prepare for it next time. Of course, someone's going to flip me off when I'm driving. What response do I want to have ready to go so that in a moment's notice I can bring it out? Because I'm still going to get triggered. We can't actually stop the triggering.
That's right.
That's built in. That's like if I hit you right below the knee, like at the doctor's, you're going to get that knee-jerk reaction. You can't stop that from happening. We can't stop the fear response from getting triggered, but we can certainly change our response to it, and we can prepare ahead of time. I oftentimes think about like a football team, a football game. The time for practice is not game day.
Right.
We got to practice and drill a lot of time ahead of time. So if I know, I love to use the example of someone getting flipped off while they're driving. I like the idea of road rage as a great place to, like the dojo, to practice your skills. So if you know this is the thing that always amazes me, is that people will go out into traffic, right? They'll go drive around, they'll come home and they'll complain to a coworker or a spouse or a friend. Oh my gosh, there's this idiot, biggest idiot in the world driving behind me or before me. And I mean, can you believe the way the traffic was today? And they'll say things like, can you believe? And I'm like, yeah, I can. I've actually been driving since I was 16 and I'm 46 now. So I've got 30 years of driving. I can believe that there's going to be good traffic and bad traffic. I can believe that there's going to be courteous drivers and discourteous drivers. I'm actually not surprised by any of it. And that's part of the problem, is that people get surprised continually by highly predictable events. But if you prepare yourself ahead of time to go, I expect this to happen. So when it happens, if someone flips me off, I'll just either ignore it, or I'll just wave, or I'll just let them in, because I don't really care. Who cares if they get there 5 seconds to their destination before I do?
And what you're doing, so the old part kicks in. So this is the throttle.
Oh yeah.
Eat it, fight it, screw it, steal it, drink it. It doesn't matter. Anything to survive. And the old parts are amoral. No values, no ethics, and that's the throttle. Prefrontal lobes, those are the brakes. And so what you're doing when someone flips you off, which probably happens quite a bit, maybe not even enough, but is what you're doing is you're applying your brakes. So when this kicks in, you're not letting it stay up as high and as long before you apply the brakes and go, whoa, hang on a second. And then as soon as you start talking to yourself saying, hang on just a sec, this really isn't a life-threatening situation, then you get that transmigration back up here. And so then this takes over again.
Very cool. Very cool. And that's what we want to be able to do. We want to keep putting the person back into their own driver's seat. So if we understand the mechanics, these are your mechanics. I mean, this is an amazing piece of biotechnology. I mean, you can send a signal, hey, do this with your hand, and it's going to do this with your hand. It's amazing. It's very obedient. It will do as it's commanded. But if we don't have higher functioning commands here that are really clear, that are very convincing to this old primal system, then the primal system has a right to take over. Its job is, right, as you were mentioning earlier, is to keep us alive. Fear gets a bad rap. Fear is one of our best allies. It keeps us alive, but it has a prime directive that keep us safe at all costs, even the costs of our happiness, even the costs of our peace or mental contentment or anything else. So if there's a possibility of a threat, better overreact than underreact, because better safe than sorry. And so fear gets a bad rap because we think this fear is such a bad thing. It's really not. It's just that it's not supposed to drive all the time.
Right.
Fear actually, if you think about how much energy it takes to be in a fearful, anxious, angry, depressed state, it takes a lot of physical energy. Most people are having those emotions. They're really physically exhausted a lot.
Right.
And wore out.
Right.
It's affecting them physically. They say, this is killing me. I'm dying here. They're using physical terms that actually aren't actually accurate, right? But they're using those physical terms. And so fear wants to come up and protect us. But like any good soldier that's going to protect us, it needs to have some R&R.
Right.
It needs to be able to say, hey, stand down, at ease, soldier. Thank you, but I got this. And we let the higher command take over, let the general take over now, because this is what I'm going to do. So this idea of learning, one of the practices besides traffic is learning, look at all the areas or people or things that keep surprising you, and just say, do these things need to surprise me anymore? Another favorite is I love to hear people talk about the weather. Can you believe the weather? It wasn't supposed to rain today. I think the rain is always supposed to happen exactly when it happens.
Right.
That is, it doesn't matter what anybody else says. The weather is always exactly the way it should be. And so if we just go into full radical acceptance that this is what it is, so when the weather's what it is, I'm not surprised or upset or frustrated or irritated and getting triggered. Because when I get surprised, frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, that all triggers, does that transmigration back down to here. Oh, that's a problem. A problem could cause us trouble. Trouble could hurt us. We need to protect. We need to go into fight or flight or freeze. And so, but if we just ahead of time just go, oh, whatever the weather is totally cool with me, And so, oh, well, I was hoping personally that it'd be a sunny day, but since it's a rainy day, I have got ways of managing that. I've got an umbrella and a poncho, or I can just stay indoors.
Right. So
I've got many options. I'm not stuck. I'm not threatened. I'm safe. And that's a silly example, but that could apply to a lot of things.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it's silly. I've heard you say much sillier things.
Even stupider
less
things.
Value. But that's really good because that's exactly the model.
With less value. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hate it when you're accurate.
That's the model, because the bottom line question when anything happens to us, if we choose to take a moment, is to say, okay, so what am I going to do with this? And as soon as we do that, then we're not stuck.
Right. Then we're not stuck.
We're not stuck.
And that stuckness, Gary talks a lot about being stuck and this idea of stuckness. And it's an important one because there's nothing that will trigger anxiety. I mean, we talk about anxiety, depression, anger being these really core basic emotions that we all feel, but there's an underlying experience that triggers all of them, that causes all of them. And that's the feeling of feeling out of control or having no control,
which is stuck.
Or no options, which is stuck.
Right.
And it's the worst feeling we can feel. And it will trigger fear like nothing else. And if we know that, then it's like, okay, if we can find ways to give ourselves options, then we can get unstuck. Right. If we have options, that means we have choice. If we don't have options, if we're stuck, there is no choice, which means there's no control.
Even if you don't use any of the options, as long as you have them.
As long as you know you have them, even if you don't use them.
Then this goes, oh, okay, you could do this. All right. And then blood starts to come back here, and then we can problem solve.
Yeah, one of our colleagues, Paul Olofsson, I don't know if this was his thing or he learned it somewhere and he taught it to me, but he always said you always have 4 options in any situation. And I thought this was helpful. He says one option is to change the situation. That's an option. One option is change how you feel about the situation. Another option is tolerate the situation. Another option is stay miserable. And a lot of times people don't think of staying miserable as actually an option. No, you can stay depressed. It is. Let's just talk about, is that really the option that's going to work for you? Because you've been in that position, right, where people will say, they'll ask for help, and then you'll start giving them advice or counsel. And they'll do, but this, but what if this, what if this? And I'll go, wait a minute, it's okay. You don't have to accept these ideas. I mean, being depressed and miserable is totally an option. You can do that. I'm just hearing that you don't want to do that. So I'm giving you ideas and you keep rejecting the ideas. I'm not upset about that, but I'm just curious. Why do you think that is? We start exploring. But a lot of times people think that, that being even stuck isn't an option. It really is.
And by asking them those questions, they have to use their prefrontal lobes to come up with a solution. So it's a mechanical process.
Yeah.
You taught me a thought stopping technique once.
Oh, did I? What
Yeah,
was that? It was probably brilliant, right?
It was brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It was
Okay,
brilliant.
this is one of the ideas that had value as opposed to most that don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So this is when we worked at Valley, and I was actually in the men's room doing business, and I thought,
is this where I taught it to you?
I'm going to try this. No.
Okay.
no, but this is where I practiced it. I had a lot of anxiety that day and a lot of negative racing thoughts. And it's like, I got to be able to focus and concentrate. And I go, oh yeah, Vlad the Impaler taught me this. And for thought stopping, snap your finger next to your ear, push your hand out, and you say, stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there I am in the bathroom. Make sure no one's in there. And it's really echoey. And I go, well, I don't care if anyone hears or not. And all of a sudden you hear this, stop, the echo. And for several seconds, all of a sudden.
Did you clench?
The negative racing thoughts stopped, and I went, oh, that really works. So you're moving, you're hearing, you're seeing, and then you're speaking. So other than taste, that's pretty much the brain.
Right. Yeah. Really using just all these primal, basic core senses. Right.
And to interrupt the negative downward spiral, you've got to stop it and then replace it with something positive. And it really is about mechanics.
Yeah.
How can I change my brain chemistry rather than saying, I am depressed, I am. And then we start to buy into our story and then invest in it.
Right.
But if I go, oh, I'm not feeling so well, my brain chemistry is on this side, I want it to be on this side. Oh, I know some ways to do that. Right.
And that becomes very empowering. And it's sometimes we think with these racing thoughts or these obsessive thoughts or anxious thoughts, we have to be they're so involved and complex. We need a solution that's just as involved and complex. And really something as stop is so interesting because it's so incredibly simple. How could it actually work? Something that simple. No, I've got big problems here. Don't give me some stupid little dog training technique. But that's really all it is. It's actually dog training, right? You think about when you train a dog, it's clickers and short, abrupt commands, very clear, so there's no confusion. And dogs learn really effectively when they're trained consistently. And so when I teach these thought-stopping techniques, I really encourage people to think about you're just training your brain is just like a puppy,
right?
So you're just training the puppy, and of course any dog trainer will tell you it's consistency is key, repetition is key. Think about how many times you've taught a skill or something, and a client will come back and say, I tried that and it didn't work. And I always remind them, like, I appreciate that, but just bear in mind that that's like me going to the gym 3 times,
right,
working with a personal trainer and say, oh, I didn't lose 50 pounds, so I guess it didn't work.
Right.
That's nothing wrong with the trainer, nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with the gym. Some of it is just time and repetition. And some of it's just training. One of my favorite examples, actually, of this training, I teach people training, obviously, like whether it's these skills or whether it's parent training or whatever else it is. One of my, we've got sitting down here, you can't see her, or if you're on the podcast, obviously you can't see her either, but I've got my little border collie, Pepper. And so I like to watch border collie videos online because Pepper is not a sheepdog. But these other border collies that do these amazing things and tricks are really fun to watch. And so I was watching this one dog trainer. She was teaching a younger border collie how to catch a Frisbee. And she went through all these little micro steps in training the dog to get accustomed to the Frisbee, to want to be interested in the Frisbee, to follow these commands with it. And it was just a little 5-minute video on YouTube. But then at the end, this is my favorite part of the video, then at the end, she throws the Frisbee and it sails through the air and the dog beautifully jumps, leaps, this amazing leap and catches it perfectly midair. I mean, it's just like an amazing, wonderful moment between trainer and dog and just a beautiful animal. And my favorite part was when she says, and that's what you get after a year of consistent training. And I'm like, yes, that's it. Because too often we're getting frustrated with ourselves that we're not getting it soon enough, that our kids aren't getting it soon enough, that our spouse isn't getting it soon enough, that I'm not getting it soon enough. What the heck's wrong with my kid, my spouse? What's wrong with me? And while there are some things that can work quickly, like the thought stopping interrupt, we also need to give ourselves the freedom that this old primal brain that you're talking about is ancient. Everything's changed for us as human beings. Our cultures have changed, our religions have changed, our political systems have changed, our governments have changed, our culture, our society has changed. Norms or standards of beauty have changed. Everything's changed. One thing that hasn't changed is that brain you're talking about. You go back 1,000 years, 4,000 years, 10,000 years, 30,000, it's going to be the same brain. And so this stuff doesn't change very quickly. And so we need, on the one hand, there's some things that we can change very quickly, but other things we can't. And so we need to have a certain amount of not just patience with ourselves, a respect for the machinery.
Right. So up until about 10,000 years ago, humans lived in very small groups. Like 300 would have been a metropolis.
Yeah.
All right. 10, 20, 50, something like
Okay.
that. So our brains were built for about 250,000 years ago. Very small groups. All of a sudden today, we've got cities of, tens of millions of people.
Yeah.
And so being patient is really helpful to go, wait a minute, I've got this old hardware in this modern world. And of course, it's not going to work all that well unless you're aware of it. And when you were talking about that veneer, we think that the prefrontal lobes are running the show. The CEO is giving orders to everyone down the line. The reality is it's the janitor who is sending little surreptitious messages, little pieces of paper. Hey, why don't you think of this? Why don't you do that? And the CEO picks it up and reads it and says, by golly, I've got an idea. I think here's what we're going to do. And the janitor's like, thanks. That's exactly what I wanted. And you see that.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I started paying attention to that, working in the substance abuse issues. A woman came into the group one day and she said, oh yeah, I relapsed. And I said, okay, let's talk about the pre-lapse. She goes, no, I relapsed. I said, yeah, I know, I got that. But what was going on before that? And she said, well, nothing really. I was in rehab last year, and there was a guy I hadn't seen. He was also in rehab, and we became friends, and I hadn't seen him for a year. All right, so here's the janitor saying, you haven't seen your buddy. Why don't you give him a call? You know, he's probably clean and sober and all of that stuff. And you want to be a good guy and just check up on him.
Yeah.
And so then the CEO said, well, I want to be a good guy. I'm going to reach out. Right. So, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. Why don't you come on over? Just stop by. I'd love to see you. Okay, great. She goes over there, he opens the front door, and there's the cocaine on the table. And she said in about 5 seconds, she was high again. So that's the prelapse. And the janitor sends these BS circuitous messages to the CEO. So the CEO thinks it's running the show.
Right.
And that's that thin veneer you're talking about.
Fantastic. I like that analogy. I'd never heard that before. That's so right, though. And so we have to have a little bit more respect for the janitor.
Yeah.
And know what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, a lot of it's just these examples. I mean, it's about just making the covert overt, just getting really clear about what's really going on. Awareness is so much of human change, right? That and if we can just be aware of these things, not just aware of them, it really just accept them too, value them. I mean, we want to change some of these things, but sometimes it's better to really accept not only where we are, but how our biology is, how our brains are, and have such a deep, profound respect for that instead of trying to first go off and just change it and fix it, maybe realize, wait a minute, why is it there? What is it doing? Is there any value even to what it's doing? Maybe there is. Maybe I don't need to change the whole thing. Maybe I just need to tune into it better and then tweak a few things. And then that actually makes the whole process more effective. And, going back to the patience idea, as I always tell people that, patience isn't just a virtue, and it is. But I think the reason it's a virtue is because it's a highly effective strategy.
Right.
Patience with self and with others. And part of patience is getting educated. It's taking the time to learn this stuff.
Because then you are engaging or re-engaging the prefrontal lobes. You're asking the limbic system to take a nap for just a little while so that you can get yourself through the situation. Yeah. And by talking about patience or by talking about any kind of strategy, you're not stuck. You have to get the ball rolling. It doesn't have to go 100 miles an hour, but it just has to get unstuck. Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've changed the world.
Was that it? Was that enough to do it? Okay, cool. Right on.
Yeah. Money should be flowing in.
Well, it should by now. Yeah. So since this is our first episode, there's probably, all two of our listeners have probably contributed $1,000 each.
Thanks, Mom.
She's so nice. Well, okay. And I think when we started, did I introduce the song when we first started?
I don't know if you did or not.
I don't know if I did or not. So let's see if sorry. I'm getting used to the mixer here, guys. Give me a second here. So I just wanted to clarify, we're going to be sometimes pilfering other people's music and as in our intros, just kind of go at the heavy metal, get it? It's kind of a clever little play on words there. Thing and just kind of as I mentioned, Gary's a drummer and a musician as well, and I know how to listen to music, so I bring my musical talents in as well. And so, but this the fantastic tune that we started out with is "Little Sister" by Queen of the Stone Age from their 4th album, "Lullabies to Paralyze." Oh, cool title! I love titles. I love band names and album titles. I mean, I don't have any musical talent, but I could come up with a lot of those really good ones. And maybe I could just sell them to bands who can't come up with their own titles.
Or we could ask our listeners to come up with them, and then we could sell them to titles.
Oh, yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, we're not stuck.
Because musicians that are creative enough to write a whole song and lyrics clearly aren't creative enough to come up with their own names for things. So I'm really serving a purpose there. So anyway, but please go out and buy these great, this great jam, as well as other jams that we have and songs that we feature in our intros at the at heavymentalhour.com. And so we appreciate you listening. Please go to heavymentalhour.com and do 3 things. Get the songs, books, or other media that we reference in each podcast. Listen to other great episodes as they come. Look for the schedule of events when we have, we're going to set up a calendar and a regular time to meet when we have broadcasts, so you can actually attend the live vidcast and even put some. We'll have some Q&A sessions as well. Please definitely go there to heavymentalhour.com and contact us. Give us your ideas and questions for upcoming podcasts, topics, and interviews that you'd like to hear. We'll have other of our colleagues come in and pick their brains. There's a lot of brilliant people out there that have been great mentors and to us as well, and means a big deal. So. And while you're online there, please like us on Facebook.com, Heavy Mental Hour, and at Twitter at Heavy Mental Hour. So thank you. Peace. Rock on.
Can we do our personal wet t-shirt contest next time? We can talk about that.
Are we seeking to gain or lose viewers? Yeah, we can. I'm open to it. I mean, I just don't know if it's a wise choice.
All right. Well,
but I'm we meaning you. Sure, absolutely.
Okay. All right. I'll compete against myself, and then I'll be simultaneally angry and elated when I win and lose.
Taking both first and last place. Well, I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
See you next time.